What is going on, guys? Welcome back. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Dern versus Jan. And I'll be honest, this is a pretty weak card. We've had a nice run of fight nights, and we do have a couple of stacked pay-per-views coming up. And this is definitely the sacrificial event for those cards. The main event, honestly, not very compelling in my opinion. The UFC's really done them no favors either with the supporting lineup. Outside of Randy Brown, I don't have a ton of interest in the other fights and matchups. But even then, Brown is going up against a very old Trinaldo, which appears to be the theme for this card. It's a bona fide retirement party out there. So it's a pretty tricky card for those reasons. And on top of that, there's a number of unreliable fighters on the card as well, a number of debuting fighters. So, pretty dicey card in terms of, bets and stuff, but we're going to break it down regardless. Hopefully still give you guys some useful information to work with here. But we do actually have 14 fights to break down. So let's get this moving along and dive right into the first fight of the night. And in the next fight, we have Tabatha Ricci versus Jessica Penne. And Ricci's the minus 155 favorite. Penne's the plus 135 underdog. Pretty interesting fight between two grapplers. But we'll start with Ricci first. So with Ricci, she is, like I was saying, a grappler. Very limited striking, though. I really don't think she's any good on the feet. I think she's quite small for the division, and a lot of her strikes do come up very short. But she is a very good grappler. She's got a decent double leg, good timing on the level change. She's pretty aggressive on top. She's got decent ground and pound. She will look for submissions, but I do feel she's probably going to struggle finding finishes at the UFC level just because she's going to be a bit undersized. Unless she takes a massive step down in competition, I think that a lot of these bigger girls, even if they're less skilled, should be able to fend off a lot of the submission attempts and, stay safe. That said, though, she's going to be going up against a veteran in Penne, who is also someone coming from a grappling base. Boxing, I'd say, is serviceable for a grappler. Nothing special, though, but with Penne, she is, I'd say, a pretty crafty grappler. Very opportunistic, someone who will look for arm bars, heel hooks. She's got a nice back take. But the issue with Penne is, she can get a little too comfortable on bottom. And she is someone who will pull guard sometimes, so not a great look. She's also getting a bit up there in age, so a little concerning there, 39 years old. Honestly, I don't think she's looked that great either in her comeback fights. I know she's 2-1 technically, but I feel like those wins were a little fluky. But taking a look at this matchup, I do actually favor Penne on the feet. I think that she's the better boxer. I don't think she's great or anything, but I really just don't rate the striking of Ricci whatsoever. That said, I do like Ricci to hit takedowns here. She's been pretty reliable to hit takedowns. She's been able to hit, 5 takedowns in the 2 wins that she's had in the UFC. Her one loss was against Fiorot, which, you really can't take too much stock into because, that was a fight she was coming in short notice. Up a weight class against a very big, very strong, and very good striker in Fiorot. So, I can't knock her too much for that performance. And honestly, that doesn't really even pertain to this matchup anyway. So, for this fight, I do think that we see Ricci hit takedowns. Penne's got pretty bad takedown defense. She might even just pull guard. So, she might give up a top position to Ricci. I do think that Ricci should be able to get off some control time. Penne may put up some resistance early in the fight, stuff some takedowns, maybe even work her way back up to the feet. But I do think as the fight starts to progress, she may get a little more accepting of bottom position, look to just throw up submissions off her back. But I think Ricci will be able to stay safe in there. Ricci is a black belt herself. She was able to stay safe against Viana, who is a pretty crafty bottom player also. Was able to avoid the arm bars, the triangles and stuff from Viana. So I do think Ricci's going to be able to get it done here. The size and the fact that she's going up against a veteran grappler does have me a little concerned here. Penne does have some pretty tricky sweep from bottom, but I do think that Ricci is going to be a good enough grappler here to stay safe on top, maintain control, and just rack up enough control time to pull off a decision win here. Overall, I just really haven't been all that impressed with Penne's recent performances. Her win against Godinez, I thought was a bit of a robbery, if I'm being honest. She was able to take the back of Godinez a couple times and kind of just win that way, but I felt like that was just a bit of greenness from Godinez. Godinez, while she is a good wrestler, still has yet to prove her grappling just yet. And honestly, I still thought that Godinez won the fights because she had much bigger moments. She was hitting takedowns. She was slamming Penne. She was landing the much bigger shots on the feet. So I do think Godinez won that fight. And then the fight against Kowalkiewicz, Kowalkiewicz just kind of jumped into Penne's guard and got submitted right away. I don't think that's going to happen here with Ricci. I think Ricci's going to be able to stay safe. And Ricci, while I do think she's undersized, she's low-key kind of jacked too. So I do think Ricci's going to be able to hit takedowns here and get enough control time to win a decision. So give me Ricci by decision. And in the next fight, we have Ilir Latifi versus Aleksei Oleinik. And Latifi is the minus 180 favorite. Oleinik is the plus 155 underdog. And pretty intriguing matchup. It seems like the UFC really wants this fight to happen. It's been scheduled to have happened a couple of times already, but kept falling through. But it looks like it's finally going to happen here. But we'll start with Latifi first. A very just thick, explosive wrestler. The striking is pretty rudimentary in my opinion. He's got some heavy low leg kicks. He will lunge in and throw power shots, but pretty low volume on the feet. Really just looking to wrestle with opponents. He's very strong, very explosive, but I don't think his grappling's really all that great. He's more of a just lay and pray sort of guy in there. And he's going to be going up against Oleinik, who is a bit of a one-trick pony at this point. We know what he wants to do. He wants to get this fight to the ground and just look for that scarf hold. The striking, I think, is very basic also for Oleinik. There's a bit of process to it, right? He looks to kind of just paw the jab out, duck his head, throw a big loop and overhand to close the distance and get in on his opponent. Kind of predictable in that way, but between the two, I actually think that Oleinik might actually have better striking, but pretty limited from both guys. But yeah, Latifi's just Oleinik is mainly just gonna look to do that over and over until he eventually gets the fight to the ground or gets knocked out, and that's about 90% of how his fights play out. But with Oleinik, he is pretty dangerous in that first round, but the cardio is just not quite there anymore. He's got a very nasty squeeze on him, but again, I think he's only able to do it for about a round or so before he just completely gasses out. The optics don't look great either. You really see him start to breathe heavy after that first round. I mean, the guy's literally huffing and puffing in there. It's just not a great look. I mean, I remember in the Spivak fight between rounds 2 and 3, I mean, he wouldn't even get on the stool. I think he was just laying on his back on the canvas, which I'm not even sure is legal, but he was dead tired in there, was somehow able to survive to a decision. But yeah, man, this is a pretty tricky fight. Not a fight I really have a great read on or a ton of interest in, if I'm being honest, because, again, we have two older guys. A guy in Latifi whose path is really, to hit takedowns, but in doing so, he kind of plays into the game of Oleinik a bit. And Oleinik, say what you will about him, his age and everything, he still is very dangerous early in the fight. And even though Latifi is very thick, and I did have doubts initially as to whether Oleinik would be able to pull off his scarf hold against someone as thick as Latifi, we did see Oleinik get his arms around Lewis and put him in a pretty tight squeeze. And Lewis did admit afterwards he was pretty close to tapping that fight. And Lewis is a much thicker and girthier guy than Latifi, in my opinion. So I do think that Oleinik may be kind of live for that early submission, but I don't know how much success he's going to have beyond that first round. I don't really rate the striking of Latifi, but I do think that as the fight starts to progress, if he's able to get past that first round, we see him hit big takedowns, and I think those are going to be enough for him to swing rounds, because I don't think there's going to be too much going on the feet. I don't think there's going to be too much going on the ground past that first round, and I feel what it'll really come down to is just Latifi hitting those big explosive takedowns, just picking Oleinik up and slamming him, and just racking up some control time and winning, I'd say, a pretty boring decision here. So official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Latifi by decision. And in the next fight, we have Philipe Lins versus Maxim Grishin. Grishin's the minus 155 favorite. Lins is the plus 135 underdog. And we'll start with Lins first, who is a decent striker, I guess, more of a counterpuncher on the feet. It can be a little low volume, but he can't put combinations together when he does decide to let his hands go. He's got a decent kicking game, does a decent job of feinting. But I feel with Lins, he does struggle a bit against guys with good footwork and movement. And Lins, he can get sucked into a brawl sometimes, and his chin, I don't think, is particularly the best. But something I did like that I saw from him in his most recent fight was he did mix in the wrestling. I felt that, maybe with his back against the wall, he really needed that W and really went to it aggressively last fight, although predominantly he is a striker, and it did look like the wrestling seemed to really tire him out last fight. But his opponent, Grishin, is a striker also. Only 4 fights at the UFC level, but pretty extensive regional career. Overall, a pretty dynamic striker. A little low volume himself, but he does a pretty good job of mixing it up. I think he's got a nice little leg kick, nice jab. He's decent on the counter as well. Seems to have a bit of power. Was able to drop Jacoby twice. Knocked Antigulov out, which, I guess everyone's knocking him out, but, I can't hate him for that. And even on the regionals, Grishin's been able to pull off a lot of knockout wins. So I do think the guy's got some power in his hands. And he does move pretty well for his size and his age. But overall, I do think this is a pretty dicey fight just because I do think these two guys are... I kind of consider them a bit unreliable, honestly, and they are at the tail end of their careers, so we could see a bit of a drop-off. I don't think the cardio is particularly great from either guy as well. But between the two, I do think that Grishin has looked a little better, even though, he's going to be the older guy and probably has more tread on the tires. I feel like he's put on, I'd say, more solid performances. He did fight Jacoby pretty competitively, dropped him twice in the first round, and even in the second and third rounds, I thought those were pretty competitive. Honestly, was a little surprised that none of the judges gave him one of those rounds, but regardless, I do think that Grishin's had more solid performances recently. Obviously was able to beat Knight 30-27 pretty soundly, but, I don't really rate Knight as a fighter. Whereas with Lins, I feel like he's looked pretty subpar. Obviously got knocked out by Bosa early, which, you can't take too much from. Did get sucked into a pretty low output striking affair with Arlovsky. Ended up dropping that fight. And I know Arlovsky's having a bit of a career resurgence, but Arlovsky's really just beating bottom of the barrel guys at this point. And then, he did put on a pretty nice performance against Prachnio, but Prachnio gassed pretty badly in that fight also. And I guess for what it's worth, I thought Prachnio was actually winning in the striking exchanges. It was the wrestling of Lins that was able to get the job done for him in that fight. And even then, he didn't look like fantastic or anything. He was slowing down pretty heavily. So overall, this is just not a fight I have too much interest in. But if I had to pick a side here, I guess I'll go with Grishin. I feel like he's put together more solid performances lately. I think he might even be the better striker potentially. Can't say for certain, but he's definitely a lot more seasoned in there. I do like his distance management. Defensively, I do think he's the slightly better fighter. He's pretty good on the counter. I like his range management. He's going to be the slightly bigger guy also, which actually brings me to my last point here is Grishin's actually only fought at the light heavyweight limit twice at the UFC level. His first fight was at heavyweight against Tybura. Got grinded out that fight. And then he did miss weight in one of his other fights too. So, the weight cut could be an issue for Grishin. He is a massive dude at light heavyweight. He's pretty old too, so definitely something to keep an eye out on. But I do think he should be able to get it done here. Not super confident, but I think he should be able to eke out a very close competitive decision here. And moving along, we have Jesse Ronson versus Joaquim Silva. Silva's the minus 155 favorite. Ronson is the plus 135 underdog. And we'll start with Silva first, who is actually going to be coming in on somewhat short notice. I don't know how short notice it is, but because I know Ronson was initially scheduled to go up against Pichel, but I think Pichel dropped out a while ago, so it might not be as short notice as it seems. Anyways, he is coming off of a 1.5-year-long layoff as well, but with Silva, he is, I'd say, a pretty big power guy, someone who will move forward and throw bombs in there. He'll throw big loop and hooks. He'll throw to the body. He's got power that seems to be able to carry late. I know he's got a few late round finishes, one against Jared Gordon and the other, I think, on the regionals. The thing with Silva, though, is he can get sucked into a brawl a bit, and I don't think his chin's particularly great. He's coming off of 2 knockout losses, one to Hack Prast and the other to Glenn. But before that, I don't know if people remember, but he did get hurt pretty badly against Gordon. Gordon hurt him early in the first, or not early, but he hurt him in the first round. I don't think Gordon noticed, though, because he went straight to the grappling and kind of let Silva recover there, but I don't think it's a particularly great look that he did get hurt against Gordon. He got hurt on a number of occasions, actually. And then the same with Ricky Glenn also. Glenn, not a big power guy either, was able to hurt Silva and knock him out. So I do have some questions as to the chin of Silva, especially with the style that he fights at. And it is a little concerning because he's going up against Ronson, who does pack some power. And I feel like he's kind of similar in style to Silva, someone who will get in your face and throw down. And Ronson, historically where he has struggled, has been taken down, but in fights that are in the stand-up, he does pack a bit of a punch, was able to knock Dalby out on his return fight to the UFC, but has a ton of regional knockouts also. But coming off of the PED suspension and just moving back down to 155, I feel like that may have diminished him a bit. He just looked a bit flat and slow in that performance against Garcia. And I know the big takeaway for a lot of people was that against Garcia, at least, he got just outpaced in the grappling and eventually, got submitted by Garcia, which in hindsight isn't a terrible loss. Garcia's fighting very competitively with guys like Drakkar Klose. But even before that, Garcia has shown he could just put on a pretty crazy pace. But that first round against Garcia was actually landing, pretty much at will against Ronson. If Garcia was a better striker or if Garcia had more power, I feel like he may have been able to hurt Ronson a little more significantly that fight. But he was touching Ronson, and overall, I do think that Garcia was getting the better of Ronson in the striking exchanges, which was a little concerning for me. Ronson kind of looked his age that fight, honestly, and at 36, I feel like we are going to start to see a bit of a decline from him. On top of that, I do think the weight cut and him being off the juice could be a factor here. But as far as this fight goes, I do think it'll be a car crash. I think that we got two big, heavy-hitting dudes who like to throw down. I think they're gonna throw leather in there, and I do think someone's gonna get finished. I'm not sure who exactly, but I do have a pretty strong feeling that someone's going down. I think you can make a solid case for both guys, honestly. Both guys have knockout power, but making a case for Silva, Silva, he has been knocked out before. He's been hurt pretty badly by guys who I think are a little less dangerous on the feet than Ronson. Silva is also coming off of a longish layoff, like a year and a half long, somewhat short notice. So it could be a little rusty in there. And the last time, he came back from another longish layoff, he got knocked out by Ricky Glenn, who, again, I don't think is someone who's a very heavy hitter. And Silva has also struggled a bit against southpaws. I believe he is 1-2 overall. His last two losses against southpaws being against Hack Press and Glenn. Both of those are by knockout. And, Ronson, he is a knockout guy. He is a southpaw fighter. So I do think Silva's going to be pretty live to get knocked out here. And I think the same can be said for Ronson. Historically, he has shown, I'd say, better durability than Silva. But he has been knocked out before, so he's not cast iron or anything. And he's getting a little up there in age. I feel like the weight cut could be diminishing him a little bit. Silva does throw bombs in there. So I do think he could be live for the knockout also. So overall, I think it's pretty 50-50 on the feet. I think it'll just be which guy's able to land the bomb first. And if I had to pick a side, I think we see Silva land the bomb first. I just really did not like what I saw from Ronson against Garcia. He really just looked super flat and super slow in there. I don't think he really had any good moments against Garcia either. I don't think he did too much damage to Garcia. This will be a second fight back at 155, so he might be able to give a little better account of himself now that he's gotten that first weight cut out of the way. But I feel that he might just be a little too slow at this stage in his career. So official pick, I'm going to go with Silva to win by round 1 knockout. But honestly, I do really like the under in this fight, or the fight doesn't go. I think someone's getting put out here, and I think it's happening early, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it get stretched out a little bit. They eat a few shots from each other and then go down a little later in the fight. But I do think someone's eventually going to get knocked out here. But official pick, I'll go with Silva to win by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have a heavyweight bout between Chris Daukaus and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik's the -200 favorite. Daukaus is the +170 underdog, and we'll start with the underdog in Daukaus. So Daukaus hitting a bit of a rough patch here. The guy's a good boxer. He's got pretty quick hands. Supposedly he's a black belt also, so he can grapple a bit, but remains to be seen, at least at the UFC level. He did come into the organization on a pretty hot streak, was able to rattle off 4 knockouts in a row. But I feel like he may have potentially hit a ceiling now. he got some pretty favorable matchups during his run against guys who, subpar strikers or guys who are a little slower, a little older, a little less durable. And he was able to get the finish in those fights. But it seems like against, more legit heavyweights, guys a little closer to the prime, he has struggled a bit. Daukaus, he is a bit undersized. And I do have some questions as to if he can hang with a lot of the bigger boys in the division. And I guess in this case, biggie boy, Rozenstruik, technically going to be the shorter fighter, but, much larger frame, much girthier. But Rozenstruik, he is on a bit of a skid himself, coming off of a knockout loss to Volkov and a decision loss to Blades. But Rozenstruik, he is a power guy himself, more of a counterpuncher, can be a bit low volume for that reason, can get backed up, very bad minute winner. Terrible ground game as well. But if he's able to touch you, he can put you out. The guy's power is there for sure. All of his wins at the UFC level have been inside the distance, all by knockout. But despite all the memes and, a lot of people like to trash him, I do think the guy is still very dangerous. He's got fight-ending power, power that can carry late into fights also. But I do feel this fight is, pretty high variance in that I do think there are a number of outcomes. And what I mean by that is, on the feet, I do think that a knockout is pretty live for both sides. I kind of do favor Rozenstruik to get the knockout a little bit more, but, I'm not going to count Daukaus out here. Rozenstruik, he has been knocked out before, and it's only been about 4 months since his last knockout. So, his chin could potentially still be, a little diminished. And again, someone like Daukaus, who does have pretty quick hands, can crack, and should be pretty quick for the division. I wouldn't rule out a Daukaus knockout here, but by the same token, I don't want to, overvalue, the power of Daukaus, because, he did knock out some older guys, and depending on how the Nascimento fight goes, my perception of him and his power could change a little bit. Like if Boser just goes out there and starts as Nascimento, then, I feel like we might be overvaluing the power of Daukaus a little bit. But regardless, this is still a heavyweight fight, and he could still put his hands on Rozenstruik and put him out. But with that being said, of course, I do favor Rozenstruik a little more to be the one to pull off the knockout here. But I do think this is a fight that could potentially be a little low volume too, because like I said with Rozenstruik, he is someone who is going to wait for openings, and both guys coming off of knockouts, we could see them be maybe a little gun shy, right? Obviously, I don't think this is the highest likelihood outcome, but, this is definitely a possibility here. But as far as, this matchup and who I think is going to win, I do think I have to go with Rozenstruik, probably to win by knockout. At the end of the day, I just don't know if Daukaus can hang with legitimate heavyweights. His chin could potentially be cracked, and going against a heavy hitter like Rozenstruik, that is, I'd say, very concerning. Getting knocked out by Blades on the feet is not a great look. I do think Blades, his boxing has come along, but to get knocked out on the feet by someone who's predominantly a wrestler is not a great look. And that happened about 7 months ago, which, might be enough time for him to recover, but it's 2 knockouts in a row already. So yeah, I just don't know what the durability of Daukaus is looking like. And you're looking at the Rozenstruik side, while he has been knocked out before, his knockouts have been against Ngannou, the heaviest hitter in the division, and Volkov, who has got pretty underrated power also. Volkov is, I'd say, a pretty underrated finisher. And Daukaus, in my opinion, is not quite on that level in terms of power yet. So between the two, I do trust Rozenstruik's durability a little bit more. And I feel like when they do start exchanging, I do favor Rozenstruik a little more to be able to land a power shot and put him out. So I'm going to go with Rozenstruik in this fight. I'm going to go with Rozenstruik by knockout. I think he's going to crack the chin of Daukaus and put him out. So yeah, give me Rozenstruik. Give me Rozenstruik by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have Chelsea Chandler versus Julija Stoliarenko, and Chandler's the minus 130 favorite. Stoliarenko's the plus 110 underdog. And we have a pretty low-level fight here. I think Chandler's original opponent dropped out, and Stoliarenko's actually coming in short notice. But we'll take a look at Chandler first, who is making her UFC debut. She is mainly a grappler. Her striking is really unpolished, in my opinion. I've seen her just get into brawls. She's shown some power, but I just don't think she's the most technical striker on the feet. But from what I have seen, though, she does seem to do her best work on the ground. She's very aggressive, very physical. A ton of her regional fights, she's just in there mauling her opponents. She's had success cage pushing also if she's not able to take him down. But it's really hard to take away too much from these performances, in my opinion, because she's fought some very, very low-level girls in there. And she's kind of just been able to kind of, bully them a bit. Not to say she isn't skilled or anything, but it does seem like she's physically just a lot stronger than a lot of these girls also. But she's going to be going up against Stoliarenko, who's quite physical herself, but is also a pretty low-level fighter. And I see a lot of similarities between the two, honestly, on the feet. I think Stoliarenko's striking's pretty bad also. She's out there just winging hooks and overhands. She's very hittable, but also very tough. Was able to eat a ton of bombs from Julija, one of the heavier hitters in the division. Did go to war against Versosa back in the regionals. Ended up being just one of the most bloodiest fights ever. But really, I'd say what Stoliarenko really does best is going to be the armbar. In fact, I feel like she's largely armbar or bust. Hasn't had too much success with it at the UFC level against high-level opponents, but is actually coming off of an armbar win against Jessica Rose Clark, and on the regionals did have a ton of success going to it. That said, though, she's going to be taking a pretty big step down in competition here against Chandler. And on the feet, I feel like it's a bit of a wash. I think both fighters are pretty low level in terms of the striking. And honestly, I feel that if this fight actually plays out on the feet, it could end up being pretty competitive, pretty back and forth, pretty sloppy, but be a pretty fun fight, honestly. But I do think this fight could potentially hit the mat, and if it does, it's kind of hard to say who's got the advantage there. I feel like both have kind of struggled a bit off their back. Both have kind of played guard a little bit. From what I have seen, though, it seems like Chandler does a better job of working her way back up. But again, very low-level competition. The fighters that Stoliarenko has kind of been held down against are much higher level, much more proven. But between the two, I kind of like the Stoliarenko side a little bit more just because I feel, she is a little more proven at the UFC level. I know she's 1-4 so far, but I feel like she has lost to some pretty respectable girls. This is, again, a big step down in competition. I feel like Chandler is going to be the type of opponent that Stoliarenko should have gone up against all along. Not against Kunitskaya, in her debut, or Avila or Alexis Davis. And overall, I feel like she has made some slight minor improvements to her game. She's getting blown out by girls like, Kunitskaya, but, even against someone like Avila, she was able to hold her own a bit in some of the striking exchanges, was able to eat some bombs in return with her own, was able to, get a bit of control time off on Avila also. So I do feel that Stoliarenko, while overall she's not a good fighter, she has shown some improvements. While with Chandler, she's looked good so far in the regionals. It's against very low-level girls, and she's going to be going up against Stoliarenko, who I think is going to be able to put up a lot more resistance in terms of the grappling and on the feet too. But as far as an official pick, I think I'm going to have to go with the slight underdog here in Stoliarenko, just based on the fact that she's a little more proven at this point. And I do feel that Stoliarenko's best win condition in the armbar is pretty live here. I think that Chandler's still green enough that she could potentially get caught in something. And being the grappler that she is, I feel like instinctually she's going to look for some of these grappling exchanges, which kind of plays into the strength of Stoliarenko here. So I'll go with Stoliarenko to win by round 1 submission. Not extremely confident or anything, but I do think that she could pull it off against potentially a very green Chandler here. So give me Stoliarenko by round 1 armbar. And in the next fight, we have Krzysztof Jotko versus Brendan Allen. And Jotko's the -120 favorite. Allen is the slight underdog at +100. And we'll start with Jotko first. Mainly a striker in there. Very light on his feet, good lateral movement. He's got a nice low leg kick, jab. Has shown he can mix in the takedowns once in a while. Overall, not anything too impressive. The guy's just a decisionator in there, usually just doing enough to win. The takedown defense is solid. The submission defense is solid. We saw him stuff a number of takedowns from Shirkinov and work his way back up. And he's coming off of a performance against GM3 where he was actually taking GM3 down, wasn't afraid to get into his guard, was able to defend the submission attempts and win, I'd say, a pretty clear decision there. And that's a win that's honestly aging pretty well. But overall, if I'm being honest, I'm not a huge fan of Jotko's style. He doesn't really do too much. He's not really an exciting fighter, but I do have to admit he is generally pretty reliable. He's pretty consistent, and at the end of the day, he does get the job done, which is a lot more than what you could say about his opponent in Brendan Allen. Allen, someone who, while I do think he's a pretty skilled fighter, he just hasn't really been able to put it all together. He hasn't been all that consistent throughout his career. Overall, I do think that he's a pretty good grappler. I think his offensive striking is decent. He's aggressive on the feet. He can throw with heat. He's got a nice stabbing teep kick. But defensively, he's just way too hittable. Sam Alvey was touching him up. Sam Alvey was still timing him. Even Malkoun was able to land some big shots on him. But, Allen's biggest strength is going to be his grappling. He's heavy on top. He'll look for submissions. He's very slippery in scrambles. He's got a good submission game. But he's just not reliable to get the fights there. And, he can be a little too comfortable off his back at times. So, I do like the skill set that Allen has. It's just that he doesn't reliably get it into his strengths a lot of the time and is content to strike in a lot of fights, even if he's at a bit of a disadvantage there. And it doesn't help that he's as hittable as he is. But taking a look at this fight, I do think this is a somewhat decent stylistic matchup for Jotko. Jotko, in my opinion, is going to be the superior striker. I think he's got much better footwork in there. I think he's better defensively. And he's got, I'd say, good enough takedown defense and submission defense to keep the fight standing. I suspect that if it plays out on the feet, and I do think it'll play out largely on the feet, I think Jotko is going to be able to win a lot of these striking exchanges. And I feel like what could potentially be Allen's downfall in this fight is that it's going to be competitive enough that Allen might feel like he's winning, and so he's not going to go, shooting takedowns. He's not going to go for the grappling really aggressively. I mean, not that he usually does, but I feel like in a fight like this, he could feel like he's keeping it close enough that he might be winning on the scorecards when, in fact, I think Jotko is going to be the one getting the better of him in these exchanges. So I do see Jotko likely winning it on the feet, and I feel that Jotko could potentially make some of the takedowns as well to win some minutes and secure rounds that way. If he's able to jump into the guard of Mearshart and not get submitted, I feel like he could do the same with Allen here. Obviously, you don't want to get too aggressive with it, get too cute with it. Maybe just look to close out the round when there's about like 30 seconds or a minute or so left on the clock and just play it safe and just grind out the remainder of the round and really put a stamp on it. But honestly, I feel that if Jotko is able to keep it standing, I think he'll be able to win a competitive but clear decision here. So I'm going to go with Jotko here. I'm going to go with Jotko to win a decision. So yeah, I'm probably going to bet Jotko, honestly. I'll probably bet him by decision also because the guy doesn't really finish anybody. So yeah, official pick, I'm going to go with Jotko by decision. And in the next fight, we have Guido Cannetti versus Randy Costa. And Costa is going to be the minus 290 favorite. Cannetti is the plus 245 underdog. And we'll start with Cannetti, the big underdog, the 42-year-old in Cannetti. The legend Guido Cannetti coming off of a knockout win over Chris Mutino, doing it quicker than Sean O'Malley. But in all seriousness, I don't know if there's too much to say about this matchup. Guido Cannetti, his striking is okay. He's got some heavy kicks, pretty heavy-handed, decent clinch game. As shown, he can mix in the grappling also. But the fact is the guy's 42 years old. He's going to be 43 in a couple of months. So he's really old, regardless of the weight class, but especially so at bantamweight. His wins really haven't aged well. It's against a bunch of nobodies, if I'm being honest. And he's getting blown out in his losses. And, it is a big concern here because he's going up against a very dangerous striker in Randy Costa. And Costa, this guy's an absolute monster in that first round. Very explosive, just a very high-octane striker, very slick hands. We saw him piecing up Yanez early in that fight. He's got a nasty head kick also, but of course, the issue with Costa is, it's just not a pace he could really maintain. He completely falls apart after 3 or 4 minutes. He did also get exposed a bit by Tony Kelly in his most recent fight. Showed that he can definitely melt under pressure, especially if a heavy grappling and wrestling pace is put on him. But I just don't know if Guido Cannetti is going to be able to bring that to the table here. I think this is a pretty straightforward fight. I don't think you really need to overthink this one. I think Costa's going to go out there and just blast Cannetti. I see a sub 2-minute knockout here happening. If not, I think Costa really should consider retiring because this is pretty much a freebie for him. He's going to be the much younger, much quicker guy, much heavier hitter against a 42-year-old Cannetti who's been knocked out before. So if I'm being honest, I really do think that Costa should get him out of there early. But would I lay the minus 300? Probably not. Costa could very well look like a minus 300 in there. minus 500 even if he's able to dust Cannetti early, but if he doesn't, I just can't really trust him to keep it together, but I really do think he gets it done here. The only way I see Cannetti winning this is if Costa just empties the tank early and has absolutely nothing left, which could happen, but I think if that happens, he ends up finishing Cannetti here. So I'm going to go with Costa by round 1 knockout. I don't know if you could really play the money line here just because Costa's someone who's going to fall apart after the 3 or 4 minute mark, but I do think he gets it done. I think the props are probably where it's at this point, maybe the unders or Costa in round 1, but official pick, I'm going to go with Costa to win by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Mike Davis versus Viacheslav Borshchev, and Davis is the minus 250 favorite. Borshchev is the plus 210 underdog, and should be a fun fight, honestly. Should be a war between two strikers. We'll start with Davis. So Davis coming off of a pretty long layoff, very inactive overall, but he is a very slick boxer, decent power, good volume. I actually think he's more of a volume guy, even though he does seem like he throws with a bit of heat. But yeah, he's got good head movement. That said, he can hang out a little too long in the pocket and, take some damage there. But I feel like it is kind of baked into his style. He's very aggressive with the striking, very high volume. So, naturally he is going to leave some openings for opponents to land on him as well. But he was taking a lot of damage from Yusuff on the Contender Series. He was eating a lot of shots from Mason Jones also. And while I do think these guys are very solid fighters, taking that much damage does lead to fights, being much closer than they should be. Especially against Jones, who I think is, more so a wrestler, grappler, not someone with, very high-level striking, was able to land some pretty big shots on Davis. And he's going to be going up against Borshchev, who is a pretty legit striker himself. Granted, still pretty unproven, but from what I have seen, he does seem to pass the eye test. Borshchev, someone who will move forward and throw heat, throws with vicious intent. I like his body work. His cardio doesn't look great when he's grappled, but I feel like his striking cardio should be decent. That said, though, with Borshchev, he is still very much untested. I don't think he's really fought any good strikers yet, and this will definitely be a very tough test for him, especially on short notice. But as far as this fight goes, I do kind of have to favor Davis in this spot. He's going to be the bigger guy in this matchup. He'll be the one with the full camp. I really like his boxing. I think he might be a bit quicker also, at least in terms of the hand speed. I like his volume. And, he's just way more proven at this point. He's been in there with much better guys and didn't look completely out of place. We saw in the Yusuff fight, he's not quite at that level yet, but, he's not far behind. And Yusuff, in my opinion, is a legit top 10, top 15 guy. And with Borshchev, I feel like the ceiling is still a bit of an unknown, which will lead to a bit of variance here. And also, I don't really like the inactivity from Davis, but he is actually going to be the younger guy, and I feel like we could see some potential improvements from him. So the pick is Davis. I think he gets it done by decision. He does throw with heat, but again, I feel like he's more of a volume guy, and Borshchev hasn't really shown any durability concerns yet. So I do think that Davis is likely going to win by decision. However, I don't know if I'll get to him from a money line perspective, just because I do think this is going to largely be a stand-up affair, and I really don't like how hittable Davis is. He does take a lot of damage in fights, and, Borshchev is someone who will go in there and scrap with him. And, at minus 255, I just don't know if there's going to be a ton of value there, especially since it is going to be a striking affair. And really, for there to be value at like minus 255, there'd have to be a clear level difference in the striking, and I'm not entirely convinced that's going to be the case. I feel that Borshchev can probably be competitive in there, or at least look competitive. And like I was saying before, the ceiling of Borshchev still a bit of an unknown. There's a chance that he might not be on Davis's level, but there's a chance that he might. So it could end up just being a very competitive fight. So I think it's going to be a pass on the money line for me, but I do think Davis likely gets it done by decision. But yeah, the money line's a little ridiculous here. And in the next fight, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Dern, Shainis, and there is no line on this fight yet. This fight did get announced somewhat recently. Yusuff obviously was supposed to fight Chikadze a couple weeks back, but Chikadze pulled out, and they're giving him a short notice fill-in, some random guy making his UFC debut. So a little bit of a mismatch potentially, but I'll still break it down, and I'll give you a potential line for it a little later in the breakdown here. But we'll start with Yusuff first, the proven UFC veteran. Pretty legit striker, someone who's very aggressive on the feet, likes to walk opponents down and just throw heavy against them. He can be a little low volume at times. He does load up sometimes on his shots, but he does throw with a bit of heat, although I feel like the knockouts haven't really come at the UFC level for him. But his opponents definitely do respect his power. He's got a nice low leg kick. He will consistently chop at the legs. Has had a ton of success with it throughout his UFC career. And some criticisms that I guess I have with Yusuff is he can load up sometimes with the striking, and his cage cutting isn't particularly the best. Takedown defense is a little spotty, and in fights that do involve a lot of wrestling and grappling, he can slow down a bit, and that is a little concerning for this matchup because he's going up against Shainis, who does appear to be a pretty wrestle-heavy fighter. The striking for him is a little awkward. He is someone who will, slam the leg kicks and wing big bombs on the feet, but generally it does seem like he's looking to just get in on the hips of his opponents, take them down, and kind of smash them from top. He's very explosive with the takedowns. He's very aggressive on top with the ground and pound, and his grappling does seem okay, I guess, but it is worth noting that it's against pretty low-level guys. And Shainis, he's actually been pretty active in there, fighting 5 times in the last year, mainly at 155, but he has fought at 145 before. But as far as this breakdown goes, I do think it's, somewhat straightforward. I think Yusuff is going to be the significantly better striker in there. I think he should be able to land bombs on Shainis standing. I think he should be able to piece him up. Shainis has shown pretty poor striking defense, even on the regionals. So this is, I think, a very big mismatch on the feet. The wrestling could be a factor for Shainis. But again, he hasn't really shot on guys like Yusuff, much bigger, much more explosive, much stronger, and much higher level on the feet compared to a lot of his regional opponents. And Yusuff, in my opinion, is a pretty underrated grappler. He doesn't go to it a ton, but I do think his grappling's pretty on point. He has shown proficiency there. So I definitely don't think that Shainis is going to be able to dominate Yusuff on the mat. He might be able to hit takedowns, maybe rack up a little bit of control time, but I don't know if he's going to have too much success there, especially when he's going to be eating bombs from Yusuff on the feet. So I do think Yusuff is going to open as a pretty big favorite here. I'd line him at maybe about like minus 350, minus 400, but I don't know if I'd get to it if I'm being honest, just because I do think there is potentially a path in the wrestling for Shainis. We don't really know where his ceiling's at, but he has shown that he could repeatedly hit takedowns in there, and if he's able to get that wrestling going early against Yusuff, we could see Yusuff slow down a bit. The takedowns may come a little easier, and we could see Shainis potentially grind out a decision. Not super likely, but it is a valid path here, especially since Yusuff hasn't really fought a ton of wrestler or grapplers. Yusuff's actually fought mainly strikers in there. He's fought some guys like Philipe who can wrestle a little bit, but Philly's not someone who's going to look to spam takedowns in there. And I do think that going into this fight, we see Shainis really look to spam takedowns because he's definitely not going to be able to hang on the feet with Yusuff. So, official pick for this fight, I think I'm going to go with Yusuff to win by decision. Obviously, I do think the knockout is live, especially considering there could just be there is going to be a massive level gap. But I feel like Shainis may be able to work in some of the wrestling and kind of hang on, when he is hurt and kind of stall the fight out. But overall, I just see Yusuff being able to do enough damage to really swing rounds that way. I don't know if the takedowns and a little bit of control time will be enough for Shainis to win here, but I do think it'll be enough for him to survive to a decision. So I'm going to go with Yusuff by decision. Again, wouldn't be surprised if he got the knockout here, but I'm kind of leaning a decision for him. So official pick, I'll go with Yusuff by decision. Probably won't have too much action on this fight just because I feel that the line may be a little ridiculous, and if it's completely out of hand, I might actually end up taking a small poke on Shainis by decision just because I do think there's a very small chance he could find some wrestling success here. Doubtful, but official pick, I'll just go with Yusuff by decision. And in the next fight, we have Raoni Barcelos versus Trevin Jones, and Barcelos is the minus 205 favorite. Jones is the plus 175 underdog. And we'll start with the big favorite in Barcelos first. So Barcelos, just a very seasoned fighter, very well-rounded. He's got good boxing. He's solid in the clinch. He can wrestle. He's got solid jiu-jitsu. This guy could pretty much do it all. The only issue is he is 35 years old. He's getting a little up there in age, especially at bantamweight. And, he can be a little low volumes at times, but beyond that, I do think he's a very solid fighter. And, despite his age, I don't think he's shown too many signs of slowing down. He did drop his last two, but the fight against Valiev, it arguably should have been a draw. But it was still a very competitive fight. And Valiev, in my opinion, is a legit fighter. And same with Victor Henry, a guy who's been, pretty underrated. But yeah, Henry was able to push a pretty insane pace against Barcelos. But he's going to be going up against Jones, who, I honestly don't have the greatest read on. I didn't think too much of him coming into the UFC, but he was able to make a splash, come in and rattle off 2 quick knockouts against pretty legit guys in Valiev and Bautista. But since then has come off of, I'd say, 2 pretty subpar performances. His performance against Kakramanov, where he was largely just cage pushing the whole fight and eventually got submitted. But Kakramanov, pretty legit fighter. And then against Basharat, who, I feel like the verdict's still out on him, but, he did lose a pretty clear decision to him. So yeah, not the best read on him. Kind of hard to gauge how good this guy really is. But from what I have seen, he does seem pretty well-rounded. Decent kicking game. A little flat-footed on the feet, but has shown he could, knock guys out. Does have a bit of power. But, in hindsight, it does seem like it might be a bit of an anomaly, as he hasn't had too many knockouts before that. I believe he's actually only had one other knockout on the regionals. But I guess the big issue with Jones is he can be a bit passive in there. He just doesn't do too much. I think he's a pretty terrible minute winner. Even in the fights that he did get the knockouts in, he was, in my opinion, losing up until then. He was hurt pretty badly against Valiev. Did show phenomenal toughness there. But yeah, overall, I just don't quite know what to think about Jones. He is a little tough to crack, but taking a look at this match, I do think that Barcelos is going to be the better fighter everywhere. I feel like, honestly, this could be a spot where we're getting Barcelos at a bit of a discount because he's lost 2 in a row. Historically, Barcelos is someone who the market's really high on. He's routinely coming in at like minus 400, minus 500, like minus 1,000 in some fights. And unless he's regressed significantly, I feel like he should still be the better fighter here. And potentially we're getting him at a pretty discounted rate, honestly. But stylistically, I just don't really know what Jones has to offer to Barcelos that, Barcelos hasn't really seen. I think maybe Jones may be able to pull off a knockout. Maybe he's able to rack up some control time, against the cage. But the thing with Jones is, if he isn't able to get that knockout, he's not someone that's really good at minute winning. I don't think he's like a fantastic grappler or anything. He may be the more physical guy, but he's not out there pushing a significant pace or anything. So overall, I just kind of favor Barcelos pretty much in all phases. I think Barcelos is the better boxer. I think he's got better volume on the feet. I think he might be the better grappler also. So overall, I kind of favor Barcelos to be the one out here dictating the pace, maybe being able to dictate where the fight goes. So yeah, I do like Barcelos in this spot. Unless he's just completely fallen off a cliff, I do think he should get the job done here. But even against Victor Henry, where, Henry was able to 30-27 him, Henry was pushing an insane pace in there. That guy's got, pretty crazy cardio and output, which Jones does not. So I got to go with Barcelos here to get it done. The age is a bit of a concern, but he hasn't shown too much of a decline. So yeah, I'll go with Barcelos. I think he's a little better everywhere. I think he can outstrike Giles or Jones. I think he could potentially outgrapple him also. So yeah, I'm going to go with Barcelos to win by decision. And in the next fight, we have Daniel Santos versus John Castaneda. And Castaneda is the minus 210 favorite. Santos is the plus 180 underdog. And we'll start with him first, the underdog in Santos. Seems like a decent striker. I will say this, though. He does seem like he's winging a lot of big shots in there. We'll go for flashy spinning attacks. Is generally just looking for the kill with a lot of the strikes he's throwing in there. So he is dangerous, pretty dynamic, but those techniques are definitely going to be a lot harder to land, especially as he's fighting better opponents who are a little more technical, guys who are a little more defensively sound. And I think that just might be a bit of his greenness showing through. He's able to pull it off against these low-level guys, but now that he's taking that step up, he's probably he probably realizes that he's not going to be able to get away with it, and we'll have to work on his fundamentals a little more, looking to set those big flashy strikes up. But it'll be interesting to see how he does in this fight, because he's going up against I'd say a slightly more proven fighter in Castaneda, somewhat well-rounded, mainly looking to strike in there, but He has shown he can mix in some of the wrestling. But on the feet, he's got good output. He's got a high work rate, decent pace and cardio also, and he can mix in a little bit of the grappling. But again, he does generally prefer to strike. Overall, I do think he's a decent fighter. Nothing special or anything, but I do think he's got a well-rounded enough skill set and has got enough attributes here to probably have a decent career at the UFC level. But, I do think that he's probably going to be one of these borderline gatekeeper type guys. But taking a look at this fight, though, I do think that it's a somewhat tough fight to call just because I do think there are some unknowns on both sides. I feel like the ceiling for Santos could be higher. I feel like he still needs to round out the rest of his game, but he does seem like he's got a solid baseline. Whereas with Castaneda, I think he's maybe a little more proven. But even then, it's still a little hard to say because his wins have been over. I guess Miles Johns is a decent win, but the win over Wineland I don't think is that good in hindsight, considering Wineland's, I think his chin's kind of done. But he's also got a loss to Nathaniel Wood. Got beat pretty soundly in that fight, but we all know Wood's a pretty legit guy at this point, so still kind of hard to gauge where Castaneda's really at, and it's kind of hard to gauge where Santos really is at either. He does seem like an upper-end regional fighter, but he's clearly a level or two beneath Arce, but that's a pretty big margin to work with, and I do feel that Santos is young enough that he could be making improvements, especially after a performance like that against Arce, where he got beat pretty thoroughly. And that is a fight where you kind of have to go back to the drawing board a bit and realize, you got to change up your style a little bit. Can't be throwing, big looping shots, big spinning attacks. You got to set those up a little bit, and maybe he's going to work on that in this camp. Or maybe he won't. It's kind of hard to say. But, as far as a pick for this fight, I kind of have to lean with the more proven guy in Castaneda. He seems to be the more defensively sound guy. I think if he's able to avoid those big dynamic shots from Santos, he could probably just outwork him there. Maybe mix in some of the wrestling to seal off rounds that way. So I do think Castaneda is the side here. I don't know if I'd lay the minus 200 because that's about the price that Arce was against Santos, and I definitely don't think that Castaneda is quite on the level of an Arce at the moment, at least, but I do think he's the side here. But I just think that given that there are some unknowns on both sides, I don't know if you could really play Castaneda at minus 200, but I do think Castaneda should be able to get it done. So I'll go with Castaneda by decision. And in the next fight, we have Randy Brown versus Francisco Trinaldo. Brown's the minus 275 favorite. Trinaldo is the plus 235 underdog. And we'll start with the underdog in Trinaldo, a veteran of the sport, getting a little up there in age, but still has been able to rack up the W's, 5-1 in his last 6, coming off of a pretty strong performance against Roberts. But Trinaldo, while he is well-rounded and he's got power in his hands, he does tend to be a little low volume. He does kind of rely on landing some big shots and winning those big moments. He's pretty good at picking when to explode, but he is pretty reliant on having those big moments to win rounds. And overall, I do feel that the margins in a lot of his fights have been pretty thin, minus the Roberts fight. The Roberts fight, I do think he won pretty clearly, but in a lot of his other fights, the margins are pretty close. He's got a bit of wrestling and grappling to go to, but at this age, I just don't know if he's got the cardio to really go to it aggressively. And I feel like that's kind of important here because he is going up against Randy Brown, who is a pretty tall, rangy striker, someone who, does a really good job of using his length. He's got a great jab, front kick and low kick that he really likes to just put out there. He's got good shot selection, does a great job of mixing it up. He's got good head movement. Overall, just a very slick striker in there. Saw it on full display against Chaos Williams in his most recent fight. Did get hurt, but was able to rally back. But all the in-between moments outside of like the big shots landing, he was able to kind of just piece Williams up in there. Williams showed a pretty crazy chin also. He was eating some big shots from Brown. But yeah, historically where Brown really has struggled, he has struggled a bit with the leg kicks. The chin is, a little shaky in there, but, it has largely held up. And, the takedown defense, I think is, it's okay. But if you're able to take him down, you can have success controlling him. And I feel like that could be a path here for Trinaldo. But like I was saying before, I just don't know if Trinaldo's really got enough in the tank to aggressively go to it, especially against a young guy like Brown, who has shown, I'd say, pretty solid cardio. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that on the feet, Brown's got a ton of tools to succeed here. Just right off the bat, the guy's going to be much younger. He's going to be the much taller and longer guy there. So if you're someone like Yanni the Greek, you're probably going to love Randy Brown in this spot just based off of the measurables and the tail of the tape. But even stylistically, I do think Brown's got a ton of tools here, right? I think he's a very dynamic striker. He uses his range really well. He's got good footwork. I really like the kicks he'll throw out there. I think Trinaldo's going to struggle a bit closing the distance. Trinaldo was struggling a bit closing the distance against someone like Dwight Grant, who is a very tall, rangy striker himself, but Randy Brown's even taller and even rangier, and I'd say even a much higher level than someone like Grant. So I think Brown should be able to maintain his distance and just look to outstrike and touch up Trinaldo. And Trinaldo, he is a pretty crafty and wily vet, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to take advantage of some of Brown's weaknesses at this stage in his career. So I got to go with Brown in the spot. I think that he's just a little too slick, a little too quick at this stage in his career. I think he's going to be able to keep this fight standing and likely just touch Trinaldo up. I think the reach is going to be a massive factor in this fight. So yeah, I think Randy Brown gets it done here. I'm thinking decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he got the knockout over Trinaldo either. Trinaldo has been hurt in his last few fights. And I feel like someone like Brown, who is very precise with his striking, can definitely take advantage. And honestly, this is going to be a big step up for Trinaldo. He has been kind of overachieving a bit in his last few fights. He is a legend of the sport. And it definitely is kind of, a feel-good story, with his, I guess, late career resurgence a little bit here. But he's going to be going up against a guy in Randy Brown who is, I'd say, a legit top 10, top 15 guy in his prime right now. A big step up from these guys like Danny Roberts and Dwight Grant and Jai Herbert. So I think Brown gets it done here. I think he could get the knockout or win a pretty clear decision here. So give me Randy Brown in the spot. And in the main event, we have Mackenzie Dern versus Yan Xiaonan. And Dern is the minus 200 favorite. Yan Xiaonan is the plus 170 underdog. And we'll start with the favorite in Dern first. So Dern, I feel like we all kind of know the deal with her. Very high-level submission artist, super accredited, best grappler in the division, arguably the best female grappler across MMA. So definitely very dangerous on the mat. But the issue with her is, obviously, she doesn't have a very reliable path to get the fight there. A lot of times it's opponents kind of just making boneheaded mistakes. And even if she is able to take you down, it's not necessarily a death sentence there, as we saw in the Rodriguez fight and even the Torres fight. But you definitely don't want to be hanging out with her there, though. And on the feet, Dern, I feel like her offensive striking has improved a bit. She is someone who does definitely seem confident there. She will move forward and throw with heat. The defense is still a bit lacking, but, for someone who is primarily a grappler, I feel like her offensive striking is decent. And really all she needs now, I think, is to really bridge the gap with the wrestling. If she's able to do that, I feel like she'd definitely be a force to be reckoned with. But as of right now, I do think that she lacks a way to really get the fight into her realm, and that's in the grappling. And she's going to be going up against Yan Xiaonan, who is a pretty aggressive boxer herself. Okay power for the division, solid output, really high work rate, does a decent job of mixing in the kicks. She is someone who will bite down and trade in the pocket also. And on top of that, Yan has shown she could mix in a bit of the wrestling, was able to get some takedowns against Kovacevic, was able to mix it in against Rodriguez also. She's not a prolific wrestler by any means, but she has shown that it is something she can mix into a part of her game. But for this fight, she definitely should look to keep it standing here. She's got decent cardio and durability, but I'd say the big issue with Yan is she's got negative grappling. Her takedown defense is pretty subpar, and her bottom game is even worse. She's just completely incapable of getting off her back. There was an exchange against Esparza where she almost armbarred herself. So, on top of having to defend submissions against an elite submission grappler, you also got to worry about not submitting yourself. So, yeah, I do like Dern in this spot here. I do think that she is pretty live for a submission if she can get Yan down. But that is a pretty big if. And, with Dern, like I was saying before, she's just not super reliable to hit takedowns. And while one takedown may be enough for her to find the submission, it's not exactly a guarantee, even against a very low-level grappler like Jan. We saw in the Rodriguez fight, she was able to have a full round to work with and wasn't able to pull off the submission. And, I wouldn't be completely surprised there if Jan was able to, kind of just stay safe, right? If she's taken down, just go full defense, on the back, off her back, use the lockdown and either just stall out the round or just wait for a stand-up, and just not give Dern too many opportunities to find a submission here. And, one of the more famous examples, I guess, that comes to mind is Takashi Sato versus Gunnar Nelson. Everybody thought that Nelson would just be able to take Sato down and submit him. Sato, a very poor defensive grappler, has been submitted on numerous occasions going up against, a very high-level submission grappler like Nelson. Nelson was able to take him down, take his back, but just could never find the submission because Sato was not concerned with getting up. He was not leaving any openings for him, and he was content to just lose the rounds 10-8, giving up control time, but not getting submitted here. And I feel like that is something that could potentially happen here. If the fight does somehow hit the ground, we see Jan just be really defensive and not leave any openings. I don't know if she's quite good enough to do that, but I feel that it is a possibility here. And if she's able to do that, how many takedowns are we projecting Dern to be able to get here realistically? She hasn't gotten more than one takedown in a fight. And even in the Rodriguez fight, which I feel like shares a pretty similar dynamic with this fight, she wasn't able to pull off the submission. And she wasn't able to have any sort of ground success or takedown success beyond that second round. So, if Jan is able to stay safe when she is taken down and keep this fight standing, I wouldn't be surprised if she was able to just outbox Dern to a pretty comfortable decision. But at the end of the day, I do think that I got to go with Dern here to win by submission. Official pick, I guess I'll go with Dern by round 2 submission. I feel that she probably can eventually get a takedown. I don't know how, but she has had a way of somehow getting fights to the mat. And with how big of a gap there is between the two in terms of the grappling, I do think she's pretty live for the submission once the fight does hit the floor there. So I'm going to go with Dern by round 2 submission, but I still can't quite get to the money line here. I feel like, especially since Dern's win equity is really just tied up in that submission, I don't know if you could really lay the minus 200 on her. In fact, I feel like Jan is probably the value side here, maybe even Jan by decision, just because I do feel that this fight could play out somewhat similarly to the Dern Rodriguez fight, where, we'd see Dern have some success for a round or so, but she just isn't able to repeatedly hit takedowns, and we see Jan just outstrike her. So despite everything I've said about Jan, I do think that she is somewhat live here, if he doesn't get submitted. So official pick, I'll go with Dern by round 2 submission, but I might end up with a play on a Jan money line or Jan decision. Might even play Dern by submission too, and I feel like that'll cover about 85-90% of the outcomes here. So official pick for this fight, I'll go with Dern by round 2 submission. And that'll do it for the breakdowns. So we'll get right into the recap for the previous event. Overall, pretty solid night for me. Did have a couple of letdown spots, but overall, I'd say a pretty successful night in terms of picks and bets. So let's get right into the recap here. Kicking off the card, we had Nicholas Mota versus Cameron Van Camp. I was on the Mota side, but ended up just playing the totals for this fight. I kind of figured that, both guys, durability issues, both guys do like to strike and do throw with a bit of heat. Kind of like this fight to end inside the distance, so I ended up parlaying that. Kind of kicking myself a little bit for not playing the Mota knockout line or Mota knockout round 1, because I think that was my initial pick, but I think Mota knockout was only about plus 100 or so not really worth it. But yeah, I ended up playing the totals instead. Was able to cash that leg of the parlay. But moving along, Tony Gravely versus Javid Bashrat. And I did pick and bet Gravely in this spot. Just wanted to take a small shot on him. Decent plus money on a veteran. Well, maybe not a veteran, but someone who's a little more proven at the UFC level against a guy who has taken a pretty big step up in competition against someone who can wrestle and does have a bit of power in Gravely. So just playing the numbers a little bit there, but in hindsight, probably not a fantastic bet, though, because Gravely just did not have enough in the tank to really have success beyond that first round. Kind of looked like the cardio gap was just a little too wide. Initially I thought that Gravely would be able to have enough in the tank to maybe have some wrestling success in the second round, but obviously not. And in hindsight, I think it's pretty clear now that Bashrat would win the second and third rounds at a pretty massive clip. So can't really say it was a great bet at all. So we move along. Maria Agapova, Jillian Robertson, definitely one of my more heavily invested fights. I bet Robertson here pretty big. I did also parlay the under in this fight. I also took Robertson to win in round 2 and round 3. And honestly, that first round did have me a little concerned. Agapova was landing some heaters early, but Robertson was able to survive and get out of that first round. And after that, I really liked her odds. And, it's kind of funny seeing the live odds also. We actually saw Robertson be an even bigger favorite after coming out of a first round where she took a ton of damage. So bookies definitely wise to Agapova falling apart. And that's exactly what happened to her in that second round. In typical Agapova fashion, a very solid first round and then just complete meltdown afterwards. Very glad to have cashed that. Definitely was a bit sweaty there, but ultimately Robertson was able to pull off that round 2 submission. So we move along. Trey Ogden, Daniel Zellhuber, definitely one of the bigger letdowns on this card. Zellhuber just looked kind of lost out there, if I'm being honest. Just getting outstruck by Ogden, getting out wrestled. Also, definitely one of the more surprising outcomes on the card. Ogden did not look good on the regionals, did not look good against Levitt, and Zellhuber just looked, I'd say, the worst he's ever looked. So not sure what really happened there, but I guess that's part of the risk of betting these guys making their UFC debuts. But we move along. Denise Gomez, Loma Lookboonmee, didn't really have any action on this fight. I figured Loma would win, but, she did put herself in some pretty precarious situations. Not the greatest look ever, but it does look like she's starting to round out her game even more, which is good to see. She's still very young, very early in her MMA career, and, she does have that solid Muay Thai base. Good to see her look to kind of add more wrinkles to her game. But moving along, Trevin Giles, Louis Koski. I think I sprinkled Koski round 1 knockout just because that is his likely win condition. But, not too much to say here, man. Both guys looked like they were a little scared. Giles probably didn't want to get knocked out. Koski probably didn't want to gas out either, and it just led to one of the most boring fights on the card. Not much else to say there, so we move along. Damon Jackson, Pat Sabatini. Had Sabatini parlayed with Zellhuber. And as I always say, if you're going to lose a parlay, may as well bust both legs. So Sabatini just getting head kicked early. I'm not sure if there's too much to add to that. Just one of those things that can happen, obviously. Would like to have seen the fight play out a little more, but what can you do? Sometimes you just get kicked in the head. So moving along into the main card, we had Anthony Hernandez versus Marc-Andre Barrio. Did go somewhat heavy on Hernandez. I had a 2-unit shot on him initially and then added on to it. I just really liked Hernandez in this spot. I felt like cardio-wise they'd be on a similar level, but the big difference would be the wrestling. And I know Hernandez has got the cardio to wrestle 3 hard rounds. And, was a little surprised he was able to just completely outpace Barrio like that. But then again, not really, because, Barrio wasn't able to keep up with the wrestling attack of Sanchez or even Park. And I do think that Hernandez has got much better cardio than these guys. He was able to pull off a late submission also, and, definitely was going a little back and forth on whether or not I wanted to play it. Plus 300, it wasn't super juicy to me. I was kind of hoping for slightly bigger numbers, but I had already gone pretty heavy on Hernandez, so I ended up passing on it, but, kind of kicking myself a little bit, but it is what it is. Tanner Boser, Rodrigo Nascimento was on the Nascimento side, had a couple of units on him as well, mainly just because I felt that Tanner Boser's ground game and takedown defense was somewhat subpar, and I felt that if Nascimento was able to take him down, he'd be able to either find the submission or just grind out time and win a decision there, and he was able to do that. Honestly, what made me a little more confident in the bet was just how big Nascimento was compared to Boser when they sized up against each other. I always knew Boser was a little undersized, but I felt that Nascimento was a little undersized as well. But them standing next to each other, there was a very clear size difference, and once Nascimento was able to get on top, he was able to control Boser fairly easily. Glad that cashed there. Pretty big underdog in Nascimento. So we move along. Joe Pyfer, Alan Amadovsky ended up parlaying the under in this fight. Also separately parlayed Pyfer to win inside the distance. I just felt that Amadovsky's not really UFC caliber. The guy's got a really suspect chin, and he's going up against Pyfer, who is a pretty solid finisher. So I mean, that was a pretty obvious play, in my opinion, pretty square, but was able to cash those relatively easily. So we move along. Andre Fili, Bill Algeo had a couple units on Fili, and then also parlayed the over in this fight, almost as like a hedge, right? Because if it went to a decision, I felt that Algeo would be somewhat live too. But I feel like most of the finishing upside would have been on the Fili side, so I'd likely cash one or the other. And it kind of worked out. Was able to double dip and cash on both of them. Was pretty dicey, but I do think Fili rightfully won that. He won that first round with that head kick, was able to hurt Algeo, rock him a bit. And that was really the big moment in that round that really, I think, swung it for him. Second round, I think, was Algeo. And then third round, I guess, was a little controversial in that Fili was able to get a lot of control time. Did also have a number of submission attempts. But Algeo, he was throwing strikes off his back. But obviously, I'm going to be a little biased here. But I do think you got to give it to the guy with the back control and the submission attempts as opposed to the guy just throwing little pitter-patter strikes, off his back. And I will say this about Fili. He's definitely one of these guys that makes fights a lot closer than they should be. I'd say if he wrestled a little more aggressively, it would have been a much more comfortable fight, but ended up going to a split decision. But yeah, I guess that's Andre Fili for you. But moving along, Chidi Njokuani versus Gregory Rodriguez. Didn't have too much action on this fight. I just took a small poke on Njokuani by knockout, but I think we got to put a little respect on Rodriguez's chin at this point. I know it's kind of been discredited a lot, mainly because of the Jordan Williams knockout, but Gregory Rodriguez has actually shown a pretty damn good chin outside of that, and definitely not going to look to fade him anytime soon, unless it's against someone who I feel's got like serious knockout power. But even then, Rodriguez has shown phenomenal toughness, phenomenal heart and durability, and it ended up just being just an insane fight, an insane back and forth fight. A great lead into the main event between Song Yadong and Corey Sandhagen. And I did pick and bet Song in this fight. Can't say I'm too upset about it. I felt Song definitely gave a really good account of himself. Not sure if it was a good bet or bad bet because, I did think that Song had his moments early in the fight, did buzz Sandhagen. Obviously, could be a little biased here, but I do think it was 2-2 going into the fifth. I thought Song had the bigger moments in the first round, obviously was able to hurt Sandhagen on the feet, and then the second round was very close. I feel like you probably could have scored it either way, but the reason I'd give it to Song was because I think he had the more defining moment in that fight where he had, Sandhagen a little hurt, and Sandhagen kind of stumbled a bit, and I feel like that was what really stood out that round in what was, I'd say, a pretty competitive round beyond that. And then 3 and 4 was clearly Sandhagen. Obviously, the cut stoppage happened, but I do think that had the fifth round happened, I do think that Sandhagen wins it. I feel like the momentum was on his side. Song was looking like he was slowing down, but you never know. That said, though, chances are Sandhagen probably takes that fifth round had it have happened. But yeah, really good to see Sandhagen mixing the wrestling. Just showed really good fight IQ and game planning. And it was one of the things I kind of neglected when breaking down the fight. I figured it'd just largely be a striking affair. And in a striking affair, I think that Song Yadong would make it very competitive, which he did, right? But the real difference maker was the elbows, obviously, but the takedowns. I think it kept Song guessing. It really disrupted his rhythm. And then the elbows obviously cut him open too. But, it just goes to show you how important, game planning is. And I feel like it's one of these things that's really underutilized, especially at a lot of big camps, right? And, I kind of mentioned it a bit in last week's breakdown for this fight. And I'm not trying to hate on Team Alpha Male here, but they're just not really a very big, game planning camp, in my opinion. And I think the same can be said about a lot of other big camps as well. And what I mean by that is a lot of these big camps, they'll have a lot of bodies there and a lot of good coaches and stuff, but I feel like they'll kind of just enhance what you're already good at, make you better at what you're already doing. Whereas with some of these smaller camps where, they don't have as many bodies, they have to rely a little more on just being a little more savvy, being a little more prepared. For example, early on the card, we had, the Zellhuber fight with Ogden, Ogden training out of Glory MMA and Fitness under James Krause. And one of the things I heard him just scream at the end of the rounds was, optics. And that basically meant just hit the takedown and kind of close out the rounds and really win on the optics, right? Which is something I've kind of preached for a while now. In close competitive fights, what you could really do to swing rounds is just close it out with a takedown. And It's something that's super underutilized. It's something that I see some veterans do, but something that should be done, I think, a lot more frequently. And, when you have, I guess, these mid-level fighters, guys who aren't as athletic, guys who don't have as many training partners to work with, maybe they're not as, naturally, athletic or talented. They kind of have to use these tricks to win fights. And, you don't see that as much from the bigger camps, in my opinion. So just my 2 cents there. But that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. A bit of a longer one, but we did have a ton of fights to break down. The recap went a little longer than I'd wanted it to, but overall, just a great event. Really happy with how things played out. But we got to look ahead to the upcoming card. We have a couple weeks off. Hopefully, we don't get too many pullouts till then. But yeah, just a couple weeks of pretty weak cards, in my opinion. But then we have some pretty stacked events moving forward. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. Best of luck with your guys' bets, and I'll catch you in a couple of weeks.